Tasha's phone buzzed for the 12th time in less than 5 minutes. She didn't reach for it. Across the living room, her husband quietly picked up the television remote and muted the applause still echoing from the National Awards ceremony. The gold trophy resting in his lap reflected the flashing camera lights that had followed him only moments earlier. The phone vibrated again. "Dad, where are you? Call me immediately." Tasha stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then she laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because after 6 months of silence, her father had suddenly remembered she existed. Her husband looked at her carefully. "You don't have to answer." She shook her head. "No." Another message appeared. "Richard, why didn't you tell me?" She looked up at the television, where the replay had already begun. There he was again, walking confidently across the stage, while millions of viewers watched the host announce his name. The same man her father had dismissed as an embarrassment. The same man her father had refused to meet halfway. The same man Richard claimed wasn't worthy of his daughter. Tasha unlocked her phone. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then she smiled, selected a single laughing emoji, pressed send, and placed the phone face down on the coffee table. Her husband watched the tiny notification disappear. "You sure?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I'm finally answering him the way he answered me." Only 3 hours earlier, Richard Brooks had been standing on the deck of a luxury yacht anchored off the coast, champagne in hand beside his older son. The award ceremony played casually on a mounted television inside the lounge, while guests talked over the speeches. No one was paying much attention, until the announcer smiled toward the audience. "Our next recipient transformed American manufacturing by proving innovation doesn't require publicity. Please welcome." Richard glanced up, then froze. Daniel Carter. His glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the polished teak floor. The applause drowned out every conversation around him. His older son frowned. "Dad." Richard wasn't listening. Daniel walked confidently onto the stage, accepted the Crystal Award, shook hands with government officials, and stood behind the podium. The giant screen behind him displayed images of advanced manufacturing facilities, thousands of employees, community projects, and headlines praising one of the fastest-growing industrial technology companies in the country. Richard's face drained of color. "That's impossible." His son laughed uneasily. "Wait, isn't that?" "My daughter's husband," Richard whispered. No one around them spoke. For months, Richard had told anyone who would listen that Tasha had thrown her future away by marrying an ordinary man with no status. Now millions of Americans were watching that same man receive one of the nation's highest honors for business leadership. The camera briefly cut to the audience. Tasha sat in the front row. She smiled proudly as Daniel looked directly toward her before beginning his speech. Richard suddenly remembered another day. Another chair. Another moment he had chosen not to attend. 6 months earlier, Tasha had stood inside her father's office holding a cream-colored wedding invitation with trembling hands. "I'd really like you to be there," she said softly. Richard barely looked up from the architectural magazine on his desk. "When is it?" "Saturday." He checked his calendar, then laughed. "Oh, that's the yacht weekend." She blinked. "You can always go another weekend." "I already made commitments." "Dad." He finally looked at her. "I've seen the venue." She frowned. "What about it?" "It's tiny. It means something to us. It looks cheap." The words landed harder than she expected. He leaned back comfortably. No respectable businessman would hold a wedding like that. Tasha swallowed. "We're paying for it ourselves." "Exactly." Silence settled between them. Richard folded the invitation and slid it back across the desk. I'm not wasting my weekend watching a complete joke. The conversation ended before she found another sentence. Within days, relatives started asking awkward questions. Is everything okay between you and your father? We heard he isn't coming. Did something happen? No matter how painful the questions became, Tasha never answered with anger. She simply smiled and said, "He's busy." Meanwhile, Richard proudly posted photos online, preparing for his exclusive yacht getaway with Tasha's older brother. Designer luggage, private marina, luxury dinner reservations. Every picture quietly announced where his priorities were. Wedding morning arrived. The chair reserved for Richard remained empty. Daniel noticed Tasha glanced toward it only once before taking her hand. He squeezed it gently, without bitterness, without criticism, almost as though he already knew something she didn't. As music filled the chapel, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. Then he whispered something that made her stop, looking at the empty chair altogether. "One day," he said calmly, "he'll wish he'd been sitting in the front row." The weeks leading up to the wedding became a test of patience that Tasha never expected to endure. Every Sunday evening, her parents hosted family dinner. Every Sunday evening, Richard found another way to remind her that, in his eyes, she was making the biggest mistake of her life. One week he smiled across the table. "So, Daniel, what exactly do you do?" Daniel set down his fork. "I run a manufacturing company." Richard chuckled. "A manufacturing company? What kind?" "We develop industrial production systems." "For who?" "Our clients." Richard exchanged an amused glance with Tasha's older brother. "That doesn't answer the question." Daniel simply smiled. "Our contracts are private." Richard leaned back. "Private usually means small." Nobody responded. Tasha quietly changed the subject. The following weekend, Richard tried again. "So how many employees?" Daniel sipped his water. "I've never really counted." Richard laughed loudly. "You've never counted. I focus more on building good teams than impressive numbers." Her brother smirked. Translation. Richard answered for him. He doesn't want to admit there aren't many. A few relatives laughed politely. Tasha felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to defend her fiancé. Instead, Daniel reached beneath the table and gently squeezed her hand. His expression never changed. The questions became more personal. "What neighborhood do you live in? What kind of car do you drive? Who are your investors? Where did you go to business school?" Daniel answered what he felt comfortable answering. Everything else he declined with quiet courtesy. "I'm sorry, I don't discuss client relationships. I'm under confidentiality agreements. I prefer keeping business separate from family." Every respectful answer only convinced Richard that Daniel was hiding failure. After dinner, Richard pulled Tasha aside. "You still have time." She frowned. "For what?" "To postpone this wedding." "Dad, you deserve someone established." "I already found him." "You found someone mysterious." "I found someone kind." Richard sighed impatiently. "Kind doesn't pay mortgages." That night, Tasha and Daniel drove home in silence. She finally spoke as they pulled into the driveway. "I hate that you keep taking this." Daniel turned off the engine. "What?" "My dad. He humiliates you every chance he gets." Daniel looked out through the windshield before answering. "He's trying to measure me with the only ruler he trusts. And you're just going to let him." He smiled gently. "Tasha, people who only respect success usually don't recognize integrity." She looked at him. "I wish you'd tell him the truth." His smile faded slightly. "No." "Why?" "Because then he'd only respect the money." She didn't answer. He reached into the center console and took her hand. I need one promise. Anything. No matter what happens. He paused. Don't tell your family anything about my company. She searched his face. Not even my father. Especially not your father. She hesitated only a second. I promise. The wedding invitations went out 2 weeks later. Everyone received theirs. Richard never responded. Instead, he posted glossy photographs of the yacht charter he and Tasha's brother had booked for the exact same weekend. Champagne chilling on deck. Luxury cabins. Sunset dinners. The caption read, "Finally spending time where standards still matter." The post spread quickly through the extended family. Within hours, cousins began calling Tasha. Is your dad really skipping the wedding? We thought maybe the dates conflicted. Did you two have a fight? She answered every question the same way. No, he's just made other plans. She refused to embarrass him, even while he was embarrassing her. 3 days before the ceremony, her phone vibrated. She smiled when she saw her father's name. Maybe he'd changed his mind. She opened the message. Only 7 words appeared. Don't expect me there. Enjoy your joke. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. Daniel walked into the room, carrying fabric samples for the reception tables. He immediately noticed her expression. Without asking for the phone, he already knew who had sent the message. She handed it to him anyway. He read it once, locked the screen, then slipped the phone back into her hand. He smiled with complete certainty. One day. She looked up. He'll wish he'd been sitting in the front row. His confidence caught her completely off guard. For the first time since the engagement began, Tasha wondered what Daniel knew that no one else did. The empty chair drew almost as much attention as the bride. It sat in the front row beside Tasha's mother, a small white card resting against the polished wood. Richard Brooks. Guests noticed it immediately. A woman near the aisle leaned toward her husband. I thought her father was walking her down the aisle. He lowered his voice. I heard he refused to come. Another guest frowned. Over what? No idea. Whispers spread through the chapel before the ceremony even began. Tasha heard fragments as she stood behind the closed doors. Must be something serious. And maybe he doesn't approve. Poor girl. She took a slow breath. Her wedding coordinator looked at her gently. We can wait another 10 minutes if you'd like. Tasha shook her head. No. What if he changes his mind? He already made his choice. At that moment, Daniel stepped into the hallway. He wasn't supposed to see her before the ceremony, but neither of them cared about tradition anymore. He smiled. You ready? She nodded. I just wish. She glanced toward the chapel. That my dad had wanted to be part of this. Daniel reached for both of her hands. Look around. She did. Her closest friends. Her grandparents. Her aunt wiping away tears. The people who had shown up. You aren't walking toward someone who rejected you, Daniel said softly. You're walking toward everyone who chose you. The music began. The doors opened. Without another word, Tasha walked down the aisle. She never looked at the empty chair again. The ceremony was simple. No luxury ballroom. No celebrity guests. No extravagant displays. Just fresh flowers, warm light filtering through stained glass windows, and people who genuinely loved them. When it came time for the vows, Daniel looked directly into Tasha's eyes. I can't promise we'll always have the easiest life. A quiet laugh rippled through the audience. But I can promise you'll never wonder where I stand. He smiled. If the whole world turns its back on you. He squeezed her hands. I'll still be standing beside you. Several guests wiped away tears. Across the aisle, Tasha's grandmother quietly whispered, That's what real success sounds like. The minister pronounced them husband and wife. The room erupted in applause. Outside, friends celebrated beneath strings of lights while photographers captured every smile. For the first time in months, Tasha felt lighter. Hundreds of miles away, Richard stood on the upper deck of a luxury yacht. Crystal glasses clinked. Live music played. His older son laughed with clients, while servers carried trays of expensive seafood across the deck. Richard raised his glass for a photo. "Now this," he declared proudly, "is how you spend a weekend." His son grinned. "Better than sitting through some tiny wedding." Richard laughed. No comparison. Minutes later, he uploaded another photograph. The caption read, "Life's too short for low standards." Comments flooded in. "Looks amazing. Living the dream. Exactly where successful people belong." Richard smiled as the notifications piled up. He never once wondered what his daughter might be feeling. Life moved forward. Tasha returned to running her furniture studio. Daniel left early every morning and came home late most evenings. He never talked much about work. If reporters occasionally called, he declined interviews. If industry magazines requested photographs, he ignored them. Whenever someone praised his company online, he changed the subject. Tasha honored the promise she had made. She never revealed anything. Not even when relatives joked that Daniel must own a little machine shop. Then, one Monday morning, she noticed something unusual. As she drove past Daniel's headquarters to bring him lunch, television vans lined the street. Satellite trucks, camera crews, reporters speaking into microphones, security directing traffic. She frowned. When Daniel met her outside, she looked toward the growing crowd. "What's going on?" He smiled apologetically. "I can't explain yet. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine." He kissed her forehead. "It'll all make sense soon." Before she could ask another question, one of his assistants hurried over. "They're ready for rehearsal." Daniel nodded. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Tasha. "I'll see you tonight." She watched him disappear into the building, surrounded by executives she had never met. For the first time, she realized there was an entire part of his professional life that remained invisible to almost everyone. 2 weeks later, Richard accepted another invitation to spend the weekend aboard the same luxury yacht. Guests gathered in the lounge after dinner, while a nationally televised business awards ceremony played quietly on the large screen. Nobody paid attention until the announcer smiled. "Our next recipient has spent years avoiding publicity while quietly transforming American manufacturing." Richard looked up. The screen changed. A familiar face appeared. Then the announcer spoke a name Richard never expected to hear. "Please welcome Daniel Carter." Richard slowly stood. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the hardwood floor. "That," his voice barely escaped, "can't be him." The applause from the television seemed to swallow the entire yacht. No one reached for the remote. No one spoke. Richard stood motionless, staring at the screen as Daniel walked confidently to the podium, accepted the Crystal Award, and shook hands with the presenter. Behind him, a massive display lit up with photographs. Modern manufacturing facilities. Rows of advanced robotics. Teams of engineers. Community scholarship programs. Employees celebrating major milestones. Then came the words that made Richard's stomach drop. Founder and CEO of Carter Industrial Technologies, employing more than 4,000 people across 6 states. His older son blinked. 4,000. Richard didn't answer. The host continued. Recognized nationally for innovation, ethical leadership, and workforce development, Daniel Carter has spent nearly a decade transforming American manufacturing while deliberately avoiding public attention. Nearly a decade. Richard's breathing became shallow. Nearly a decade. That meant Daniel had already built all of this before he ever met Tasha's family. Before the engagement. Before the wedding. Before Richard called him a joke. Daniel stepped to the microphone. He waited for the applause to settle. I've always believed recognition should belong to the people who do the work. The audience applauded again. My team built this company with integrity. He smiled. And none of it would have mattered if I hadn't met one person who believed in me when she had absolutely no reason to. The camera slowly found Tasha in the audience. She smiled, her eyes glistening. Daniel looked directly toward her. Tasha, thank you for never asking me to become someone else. Richard felt every word like a blow. He remembered every dinner, every insult, every sarcastic laugh. Every time he tried to measure Daniel's worth by things Daniel had never cared to display. The ceremony ended. Guests aboard the yacht immediately pulled out their phones. One executive frowned. Richard, isn't that your son-in-law? Another looked him up online. Wait. He turned the screen toward the others. This company isn't new. Article after article filled the display. 5 years earlier, Carter Industrial opens third facility. 3 years earlier, CEO declines national television interview. 2 years earlier, Manufacturing Innovation Award winner. 8 months before the wedding, Business Leadership Council announces Daniel Carter as this year's national honoree. Richard grabbed the phone. His hands trembled as he scrolled. Every article confirmed the same thing. Daniel hadn't become successful after marrying Tasha. He had already been one of the country's most respected business leaders. He had simply refused to advertise it. Richard whispered to himself. I never even looked. His own phone began vibrating. Once, twice, then continuously. Family messages filled the screen. His sister, his cousins, an uncle, even relatives who hadn't spoken to him in months. Did you know? That's Tasha's husband. You skipped their wedding. Richard, tell me this isn't true. The messages kept coming. One cousin sent a screenshot of Richard's old social media post from the yacht. The caption, *life's too short for low standards*, now sat directly above a news article celebrating Daniel's award. The contrast was devastating. His older son looked away. You should probably delete those posts. Richard couldn't even answer. Across town, reporters surrounded Daniel as he stepped backstage. Microphones stretched toward him from every direction. What kept you out of the public eye for so long? Daniel smiled politely. I wanted our work to speak louder than my name. Another reporter asked, who deserves the most credit for supporting you? Daniel answered without hesitation. My wife. He looked toward Tasha. She believed in me before anyone else knew what I'd accomplished. The camera followed his gaze. Tasha smiled quietly. She wasn't impressed by the award. She was proud of the man. Millions of viewers watched the exchange, including Richard. For the first time, he understood what real partnership looked like. Not admiration built on wealth. Trust built long before recognition. He dialed Tasha's number. It rang. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. Again. Again. Nothing. Finally, he opened his messages. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, longer than they ever had before. Then he typed only 3 words. Where are you? He pressed send immediately. Several minutes passed. No response. Then the screen lit up. Tasha had opened the conversation. Richard held his breath. He watched the typing indicator appear, disappear, appear again. His heart pounded as he waited to see what his daughter would say after everything he had done. Richard stared at the screen so intensely that he barely noticed the yacht had gone quiet around him. The typing indicator disappeared. Then a reply arrived. One message. One symbol. Face with tears of joy. Nothing else. No words. No anger. No lecture. Just a single laughing emoji. Richard read it once. Then again. The weight of it settled over him, harder than any argument ever could. His daughter wasn't trying to hurt him. She was showing him exactly how powerless his opinion had become. For the first time in her life, she no longer needed his approval. The next morning, Richard drove home in silence. His phone continued buzzing with messages from relatives. His younger sister finally called. "What were you thinking?" Richard closed his eyes. "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never wanted to know." He had no answer. "You judged that man without asking a single honest question." "I thought." "You thought money was everything." She sighed. "Do you know why Daniel never corrected you?" Richard remained silent. He didn't want people treating him differently because he was wealthy. Richard frowned. "What?" "Tasha told me after the wedding." His sister's voice softened. "Daniel promised himself years ago that anyone entering his life would know him before they knew his success. He never hid because he was ashamed. He hid because he wanted honesty. And your daughter kept that promise." Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter. "So, he was already successful." His sister almost laughed. "Richard." He'd already been selected for that national award months before they got married. He owned those factories before you called his wedding a joke. You weren't looking at an ordinary man. You were looking at an extraordinary man who never felt the need to announce it. The call ended. Richard remained parked in his driveway for nearly 20 minutes. Every insult replayed in his mind. Every sarcastic smile. Every dinner conversation. Every moment Daniel had answered with patience instead of pride. That evening, Richard found the wedding video that Tasha's aunt had shared with the family. His finger hovered over the play button. Then he pressed it. The ceremony began. He watched guests smiling as they entered the small chapel. Then the camera slowly passed the front row. There it was. An empty chair. A small white card. Richard Brooks. His chest tightened. The video continued. Tasha stood behind the chapel doors with tears in her eyes. She glanced toward the front row one last time. Not because she expected applause. Because she still hoped her father would walk through the doors. He never did. Richard lowered his head. "I did that." His voice cracked. "I chose a yacht." The ceremony continued. Daniel reached for Tasha's hands during the vows. "I can't promise a perfect life." He smiled. "But you'll never wonder where I stand." Richard watched his daughter finally smile again. He realized Daniel had given her something he never had. Security. Consistency. Unconditional support. When the ceremony ended, guests surrounded the newlyweds with laughter and hugs. The empty chair remained untouched. Richard couldn't watch any longer. He paused the video, then quietly covered his face. News of the award spread quickly. Within days, newspapers and business magazines featured Daniel's acceptance speech. Friends who had admired Richard's lifestyle now asked uncomfortable questions. "Weren't you supposed to be at your daughter's wedding? I saw your yacht pictures. You skipped that ceremony." Business acquaintances, who once praised his judgment, now looked at him differently. Not because he had underestimated a successful entrepreneur. Because he had abandoned his own daughter over appearances. Family gatherings changed overnight. Conversations stopped when Richard entered the room. Several relatives openly defended Tasha. His older son, who had always enjoyed being the obvious favorite, grew increasingly bitter as attention shifted toward Daniel's accomplishments. One afternoon he snapped. "Can everyone stop talking about him?" No one answered. There wasn't anything left to say. The truth spoke for itself. Meanwhile, life became unexpectedly peaceful for Tasha and Daniel. Daniel returned to work the Monday after the ceremony aired. Nothing about him changed. He still arrived before sunrise, still greeted employees by name, still avoided unnecessary publicity, still insisted every award belonged to the people building the company with him. Tasha continued running her furniture studio. Customers occasionally recognized Daniel from television. She smiled politely whenever they congratulated them. Then she changed the conversation. Their home remained exactly as it had before. Simple, warm, private. The award sat on a bookshelf instead of a display case. To them, it was never the most important thing. The wedding photographs were. 3 months later, Richard asked if Tasha would meet him. She agreed. A quiet neighborhood cafe. No reporters. No family. No audience. When she arrived, he was already waiting. He stood immediately. "You came." "I said I would." They sat across from one another. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Richard took a slow breath. "I've rehearsed this apology 100 times." Tasha remained silent. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "No," she answered calmly. "You don't." He nodded. "I judged your husband before I knew him." "You judged me before you knew me." His eyes filled. She continued gently. "You didn't miss my wedding because of Daniel. You missed it because you thought I wasn't worth showing up for unless my life impressed you." The words landed harder than anything anyone else had said. "I was wrong. I know. I'd do anything to change that day." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the problem. You can't." A tear rolled down his cheek. "I know." She reached for her coffee. "I forgive you." Hope flickered across his face. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. The hope faded. "You'll always be my father." She stood. "But you'll never again decide how much I'm worth." She placed enough money on the table to cover her drink, then smiled politely. "Take care of yourself, Dad." She walked out of the cafe without looking back. Richard remained, seated long after she disappeared from view. He finally understood that the greatest thing he had lost wasn't his reputation. It was the chance to be present on the happiest day of his daughter's life. Years later, people still remembered the businessman who accepted a national award with humility. But within the Brooks family, another memory lasted even longer. Not the television broadcast. Not the headlines. Not the trophy. An empty chair in the front row of a wedding chapel, waiting for a father who chose status over his daughter. He spent the rest of his life wishing he had chosen differently.